This is the Toyota Corolla Apex Edition, and this is the Toyota GR86. This one is about $6,000 more than this, so the question is, can this really compete with the GR product? Let's find out in this unfair comparison. 2-liter dynamic force engine, 169 horsepower, 151 pound-feet of torque. And this thing does like to rev, so let's talk about what this thing is like in a canyon, and I'll discuss what's different from the regular Corolla to this. And first off, this is separated from the GR86 by about $5,600, so it's actually not a huge amount of money. Now, compared to the regular Corolla, the drivetrain is the same. This engine and transmission are actually the same. But what's different is the suspension, where Toyota has put all the focus and energy on. So this has separate shocks. This is unique shocks, unique valving, and they're actually quite interesting. On the rebound, they have a special spring internal to it, which is going to help increase the rebound rate, I guess, a little bit more. These are also definitely firmer in compression, in my opinion, too. We've got stiffer springs in here, and we've also got special anti-roll bars, which are solid. They're not hollow, and that's supposed to improve the handling a little bit. So overall, this thing it's pretty stiff, I'm not gonna lie. There is a lot of rebound going on here. So on a road like this, the stiffness is absolutely fine. I don't mind it. It's definitely got a real boy racer kind of feel, and in some ways it feels kind of like somebody's already gone and modded the car. This definitely has sort of an aftermarket kind of vibe to it, which I think is actually pretty cool. So this also has special wheels and tires. This has 18-inch wheels on here, and they're wrapped with 225 rubber, and these are all seasons. They're not the grippiest tire in the world. These are Dunlop. Some things I forget specifically what they are. So you can hear around the corners there's a fair bit of squeal because these are sort of mud and snow. They're all seasons. So you get a fair bit of that kind of noise going on. But it also has the option of, you can get summer tires on this too. I think it's a no-cost option with this car. So it certainly does handle pretty decently, I would say. Again, this is our baseline car here. So these tires are actually wider than the GR86. Those are 215, these are 225s. I think with the stickier tires, this would be even more impressive, but obviously you're gonna be driving in the winter, you want those all seasons, although frankly, just go ahead and put on some snow tires, that's my opinion. Now, I'm getting some understeer here, as you've probably heard. I think it's no secret from the tire squeal what's going on here. The car doesn't seem to want to rotate too much, which is interesting despite the fact that it has unique tuning. Definitely understeers a lot less than the regular Corolla, don't get me wrong, but I am getting into some understeer moments here. And yes, I just checked, I've got traction control off, so it should rotate a little bit better. Now these wheels are designed to improve brake cooling, so they are flow formed, and they're 2.2 pounds lighter per corner than the regular Corolla. Another thing that's different here, which I really like quite a bit, is the steering. The steering feel has been specifically tuned for this, and it reminds me of the GR Corolla, which I thought had really quite good steering feel, especially the Morizo edition. It'd be sort of hard to tell unless I drove them back to back what the real difference is, but there's a lot more feel in here than the regular Corolla, and there's less boost going on, and they have implemented what they call sort of a V-type curve for this, so I think the effort goes up fairly sharply with the amount of lateral G you're getting, or is it just the steering input? Let's see. They definitely does get a little bit heavier in corners like this, so you can kind of feel it loading up, and it feels pretty natural actually. Let's see here. All right, there. All right, you can sort of rotate a little bit. It's kind of difficult to do, quite frankly. Now the gearbox, pretty much standard Corolla. This is the SE version, which is the only way that you can actually get the manual transmission in this car. So that means you don't get the fancy seats, you get the base cloth seats, and these are not the most supportive or the most grippy. They don't have a lot of bolstering in them. They're not really what you want in a sports car, but again, we're talking about $5,600 cheaper than the GR86, and my GR86 is the premium that I've got, and this is essentially the base. So another thing to think about here too, this does have intelligent manual transmission, the IMT transmission they call it. Let me make sure it's turned on. You can turn it on with a button. And so that is auto rev matching. So I'm going pretty slow here. I just downshifted and it matched the revs perfectly for me. And that's kind of a nice feature, especially if you're newer to the manual transmission. And this is a pretty easy manual transmission to drive. The clutch take-up it's fairly light. The engagement point is sort of higher up on the pedal, but there's a fairly wide engagement point, which I like. So it's really quite easy to shift smoothly because you've got a fairly large bit of pedal travel where you can engage the clutch. Makes it much more difficult to screw up, makes it very easy to drive. Now, it's got a couple of downsides. Let's talk about those. It's kind of difficult to heel and tow, and that is because of the pedal placement in here, the pedal box. The throttle is hung off of the top of the firewall, I guess, and it's not hinged on the bottom of the floor like you'd get in a Porsche or a proper sports car. And because of that, it makes it sort of difficult to get my foot into the correct position. I've really got to bend my foot over quite a bit and get my heel sort of right up in the air to really heel and tow it properly. And heel and towing is the art of downshifting and braking at the same time so you can prepare for your next corner. And it's kind of difficult to do here, so I actually appreciate the fact that we have the IMT, the rev matching transmission, to make things a little bit easier. I like the fact that this is naturally aspirated. This has got port injection, and it also has direct injection too, and that's going to keep your valves a little bit cleaner, and doesn't have a lot of power, let's face it here. So the torque is, you got all the torque at about 4,400 RPM. It's sort of mid in the fours, and you sort of need to keep this thing on boil to really keep the engine in the power band, to keep that torque where you want it to be. So you really need to rev this thing a lot. If you're down below 3, it's kind of not much going on in terms of the engine. So it's very smooth, I will give it that. It does like to rev, and I feel like this engine is sort of under, they made a lot less power than they could have out of this 2-liter engine. So right now I'm in second gear, heading up this hill. I just hit 4, now I'm getting the power coming on. So it took sort of a second to get that power to come on, and it's a little bit frustrating. Like right now, let's see, yeah, if I was in third here, yeah, it's not good. So you really got to be in second to keep the engine in the power band. It is pretty fun to shift. I think the actual shift mechanism, the action, is pretty decent. It's got a pretty long throw, but it's pretty positive feeling. So it's pretty easy to tell what gear you're in. I think the gauge cluster is nice. It's very simple. You know exactly what's going on. Wish the tack was better. I wish actually I wish it was bigger. I wish they switched the tack in the Speedo, because tack is a little bit small, but again, it's not problematic. But for the money, I think this is a pretty decent little car here. I'm definitely having fun. There's a lot more space in here than the GR86. This is a lot more practical. Gets much better fuel mileage. I think on the highway, the manual transmission is rated for around 36, and that's about what I saw. Right now I'm getting 25, but I've been driving like this all day long. I don't think your mileage is going to be that bad. It seems quite efficient, and I really do like the engine. This also has a sport exhaust, I guess a catback exhaust, which is definitely louder than the regular Corolla, but it's not loud. This is not going to punch a hole in your eardrums. This is still pretty quiet, but you can sort of hear that sewing machine kind of action. This engine is very, very smooth, especially at idle. There's no lumpiness at all. This really is a very refined engine. Let's talk about the interior for a second, and then let's go drive the GR86. The interior in this car is pretty basic. As you might imagine, it is very standard Corolla. It has nice materials. It has soft touch on the dash. The seats are cloth. They're pretty comfortable. They're not really that supportive, and they are manual, but in the summer and in the winter, these are going to be a lot better than leather, actually, in terms of keeping your body temperature where you want it. The steering wheel is leather wrapped. Again, this is pretty much, everything is pretty much right out of a regular Corolla, so they haven't done a lot of interior work in the back. Way more space in the trunk than the GR86. It's basically double. It's around 13 point something cubic feet GR86 is under 7. I like the interior. I think it's pretty good. We've got a 7-inch, or rather an 8-inch display over here. Everything works really nicely. There's nothing particularly new in here. Let's go drive the GR86 and see what it drives like. Setting out in the GR86. That beep you hear is a shift indicator that I programmed in at 7,000 RPM, the red line, and this is 7,500 RPM, which is a little bit higher than the Corolla. So there's actually a number of pretty important differences between this and the Corolla that you get for your roughly $6,000. Now, first off, we've got a dedicated sports car here on a dedicated chassis. This is not shared with anything else, whereas the Corolla is the TNGA-C. It's shared with a number of other cars, including the Prius. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a pretty stiff chassis, but there's some other significant differences in here too, aside from the fact that we've just got 4 doors versus 2. Number one is the engine. This 2.4 liter Subaru engine is quite a bit more powerful and quite a bit more torquey than the Corolla. There's just no way around it. It makes a lot more power, and some people might think this engine is slow, but compared to the Corolla, I've got torque on the rev band from about 3,700 RPM all the way up to around 6,500 or so, and it's 184 pound-feet versus 151. That's a big difference. Also, the horsepower number in here is a lot higher too. We're talking about 228 on paper at least, probably makes 250 in real life, versus 169. Big difference there too. Now, another thing is we've got this, we've got a very nice transmission in here. Of course, I'm driving the manual transmission, and it feels very positive. The shifts are pretty easy, and I thought the transmission itself was pretty good in the Corolla, but what we've got here is the ability to heel and toe a lot easier because the pedal box just has better placement of the accelerator pedal. What I mean by that is the accelerator is down lower and it is closer to the brake pedal, so it's just easier for me to roll my heel over to the accelerator pedal and give it a little blip. And there is no intelligent rev matching here, so I'm going to downshift here and do my own little rev matching. Perfect rev match right there that I did myself. And of course, the handling is a little bit better in here too, because number one, this car is lighter. We're talking about a little over 2,800 pounds versus 3,150 for the Corolla, and that's a pretty significant difference. And even though the tires on the Corolla are technically wider, and you can get some pretty sticky summer tires in there as a no-cost option, these tires are 215/40/18, and they are the Pilot Sport 4, I think, and they're just a little bit stickier too. Now let's talk about fun to drive. These are actually both pretty fun to drive cars, but when you're in a canyon like this, if I am below, let's say 3,000 RPM, yeah, I don't have a ton of power, but it doesn't take a lot of time for the engine to wind up and get up into the power band, which I say starts at 3,700 RPM or so. The torque figure that you get maximum torque is a lot lower in here, and the engine just likes to rev much more willingly. The steering in here is really very, very good. I think there's a lot of feel, gives you a lot of feedback. I thought it was pretty good in the Corolla too, quite honestly. Now the seats are night and day difference here. These seats are superb. They're excellent. They got a lot of bolstering. They just hold you in, perfect rev match, and they kind of stick me in the seats around corners like this. I've got a lot of lateral support around my thigh and also around my back too. So these are just nice, nice, nice seats, and the Alcantara makes a big difference too. At the end of the day, we're talking about two pretty different cars on pretty different platforms. Obviously, we have the difference between front-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive, so you're able to play with things a lot better. You're able to play with the rear end, so to speak, a lot better with this and sort of balance the car with the throttle and with your foot. And I'm able to carry a lot more speed through corners than in this car, just because I have much more confidence. This car is nowhere near as practical as the Corolla. I mean, we're talking about 4 doors versus 2. We're talking about a pretty decent trunk space versus not so much here. We're talking about a back seat where you can actually put people in and carry things around. Here we're talking about Porsche 911 style back seats. So those are the pretty big differences. I don't think it's a big surprise. You do get a lot more for your roughly $6,000. I think there's really a lot of interesting differences here. I think they're both pretty fun cars, but let's head back and I'll give you my honest opinion. The Corolla Apex Edition in many ways is Toyota's entry-level sports car, and I use that term loosely. But for $27,000, I think this is still something to consider if you like sports cars, you're on a pretty limited budget, you want good gas mileage, and something that is incredibly practical. I think it looks good, I think it drives pretty well overall, but let's talk about the GR86. At $32,500, the GR86 is about $5,600 more than the Apex Edition Corolla. And you do get a lot more car for your money if you're looking for a dedicated sports car, but it's not particularly practical. It really only seats 2 people instead of 4. So if you're looking for something that is more practical and is at a more entry-level budget, I think the Corolla is actually pretty good. If you want to deal with the super bumpy ride, that's definitely not for everybody. I understand that. And it's not really a dedicated sports car. Day to day, I think the Corolla is probably a better choice, especially if you got a family or you need a lot more space and you're on a limited budget. There's another video right over here on the GR86 or a sports car. Click it. Thanks for watching.